Where was we last Sunday? Huh?
There's a lesson gentleman by the side of the road.
Yeah. For those that were not here, or have a memory like mine, here we are in Minneapolis. We have a lot of Lutheran congregations. We talk about a seedy section of the town. Henry Black, a black man, a college professor, gets misplaced on a walk that he took and ends up in this seedy section. A group of white thugs jump Henry and leave him unconscious and without his billfold. Then you have Aaron and Doris Johnson, churchgoers, devoted churchgoers, noticing Henry lying in a ditch. Doris wants to stop, but Aaron, not so. Excuse me, Hammond. Hammond not only won't stop, but chose to complain about the Asians taking over his country and the school system. But they make it to that camp and go fishing. But Doris couldn't get Henry out of her mind. Today, the Reverend Nikolai Knudsen was eager to get to the seminary. One of America's leading theologians was conducting a series of lectures there, and Pastor Knudsen hadn't been able to hear the first two. So he didn't want to miss this one. He was driving across the town to the seminary in St. Paul with his newly arrived intern, Bonnie Hanson. Knudsen was nearing 40 years in his ministry, and he still wasn't sure he liked the idea of women in the ministry. But that's who the seminary out east had assigned to him. He felt a bit self-conscious about it. That wasn't the way it was done in his Danish Lutheran background. Where did you get your name Nikolai? Bonnie asked her in her West Texas twang. That's the name of the famous Danish hymn writer of old, he said proudly, not quite shed of his Danish accent inherited from his Danish blonde parents. My mother was an organist and a choir director for a Danish Lutheran congregation in Iowa for many years. And the old Nikolai Grundtvig was one of her favorites. Unfortunately, my voice don't do justice to his hymns. And the conversation switched to theological. And Bonnie was eager to display her acquaintances with theology. And Nikolai, of course, wanted to demonstrate that he had lost nothing of his theological heritage absorbed through the 40 years before in a small Danish Lutheran seminary. And as they discussed bits of liberation theology and process theology, both of which were of old hat to Bonnie, although seemingly new stuff to Nikolai, they passed through the vacant lot where the Johnsons had passed less than 2 minutes prior. Henry was still down, but not entirely out. His moans had attracted little attention from passerbys, most of whom were in their cars. Bonnie spotted him first. "Pastor, there's a man lying there." Whether Nikolai didn't see Henry or didn't want to see Henry. He kept on driving. "Pastor, let's stop and see what's wrong." "Well, I'm not sure there's anything we can do. I do want to get to the seminary to hear Dr. Matty when through all this traffic." He was a bit embarrassed and again self-conscious. What could we do? Nothing, he told himself. Besides, someone else will come along soon. I'll bet Dr. Matty would prefer that we stop and help this man rather than to listen to him. That is, to Dr. Matty, Bonnie ventured. "Well, I tell you what. You seminarians are often a bit idealistic about what should be done and what can be done. We can't serve everybody, you know." Nikolai didn't really believe what he was saying, but he kept on driving. Mainly because he didn't know what else to do. The lecturer at the seminary gave him a feeble excuse, so he pursued it. "It's getting late, and I hate to walk into these things late." Well, they arrived in time for the beginning of the lecture. But neither of them concentrated much on what was being said. And it was a quiet ride back to the church a few hours later by a different route. Tran Nguyen and his wife were among those who had recently been brought to America, specifically to Minneapolis, under the sponsorship of a Lutheran church. As relatively new arrivals, their English was still fractured and limited. Both of them worked full-time jobs, one of them on the day shift, the other on the night shift. Plus, Tran held a part-time job, all of which left them little time with each other, all with their 3 small children. Now, as in the case of so many new arrivals to America, the Nguyen's were working towards self-sufficiency. They were determined not to be burdened on society, on the country that was good enough to let them in. Their goal of self-sufficiency required ingenuity in scheduling their days and nights, swapping babysitting chores with the other Vietnamese in their cramped apartment complex. And at their beginning of their new life, their supply of money was also short. Tran was on his way to his part-time job, a job washing dishes in a rather dumpy diner in a seedy section of the city. And as his battered second-hand station wagon stopped for the stop sign, he noticed the black man in the vacant lot struggling to get up. Tran was stunned, wondering what to do, as people in cars behind him impatiently honked their horns for him to move on. He did. But something told him to circle around the block and check on the struggling man. In his broken English, Tran tried to ask Henry what had happened. Henry mumbled the word mugged, but the word hadn't yet found a place in Tran's limited English vocabulary. Someone urgently, he told Henry, "My car, my car." Through Tran's grunting English, Henry was able to understand that Tran wanted him to go somewhere with him. And together they got Henry situated in the front seat of his car. Tran had taken one of his children to a central emergency center in the neighborhood a few weeks earlier. And that's where he headed now with Henry and his blood-soaked head. At the center, Tran counted out 10, 20, 30, 40, $50. Practically all he had in his name. And gave it to the person in charge. "Wait! Who is this man?" the nurse shouted after departing Tran. "I know not. I know," Tran said, pausing in the doorway. "Must go work." And he was gone. "Who was your friend?" the nurse asked Henry as she dressed his wounds. "I haven't the faintest idea," Henry replied. "All I know is I got a bit confused while taking a walk. And the next thing I knew, a bunch of guys had jumped me. And when I was partly conscious, there was this Asian fellow trying to get me up." "It's not a good place to take a walk when you don't know your way around," the nurse offered. "Well, apparently it was a good place to get some help," Henry smiled through his splitting headache.